Madman. You're a madman.
Earth and water. But you'll find plenty of both down there.
No, man.
This is Sparta!
This is Sparta, a symbol of strength, courage, and fire. But at 55, the man behind the roar faced something no sword or shield could fight. The world saw a hero who conquered Hollywood. But few know the pain, the loss, and the one moment that changed him forever. What happened to Gerard Butler isn't just another Hollywood story. It's a lesson written in fire, love, and quiet resilience. And when you see it, you might never forget it.
I mean, I started 3 months before we even came to Montreal, and then trained for another 4 or 5 weeks here before the film even started. And at some points, I was training 4 hours a day in the gym. I had 2 trainers.
The boy who waited by the window. Before the world knew his roar, before he became the warrior who shouted, "This is Sparta," Gerard Butler was just a quiet boy staring out a rain-streaked window in Scotland, waiting for a father who never came home. His story didn't begin with fame or fortune. It began with absence. Born on November 13, 1969, in Paisley, Scotland, Gerard was the youngest of 3 children. His parents, Edward and Margaret Butler, dreamed of a new beginning across the ocean in Montreal. But dreams, like people, don't always last. When Gerard was just 18 months old, his parents' marriage collapsed, and his father vanished from his world. His mother, Margaret, a secretary with more courage than comfort, gathered her 3 children and boarded a plane back to Scotland. She was barely 30, with a suitcase full of clothes, a heart full of fear, and 3 hungry mouths to feed. The small flat they moved into was damp, the wallpaper peeling like tired memories. Still, every night, she'd hum while mending her children's clothes under the soft light of a single lamp. Gerard would remember that sound for the rest of his life. "She gave us everything," he once said, "even when she had nothing." There was no luxury, no security, just a mother's quiet defiance against the odds. But what filled their home wasn't noise. It was silence. For 14 long years, Gerard didn't know if his father was even alive. No phone calls, no letters, no explanations, just the steady tap of rain against the glass and a boy's questions that never found answers. That silence did something to him. It built the foundation of his strength and the echo of his loneliness. He became the kind of boy who worked harder, spoke louder, smiled brighter, all to prove he was enough. At school, he excelled in everything: academics, leadership, debate. Teachers called him brilliant. Friends called him charming. But inside, he was still that child waiting for a door to open that never did. Then, one day, when he was 16, the silence broke. He came home from school to find his stepfather waiting by the door. "Keep your jacket on," he said quietly. "Your father's here." Gerard froze. The word father felt foreign in his mouth, and when the man he'd spent his life imagining stepped into the room, every wall Gerard had built to protect himself came crashing down. He cried for 5 hours straight, years of waiting and wondering spilling out all at once. For a while, it felt like a miracle. Summers together, laughter, a fragile bridge rebuilt too late. But just a few years later, cancer took his father away again, this time for good. That loss became the heartbeat of everything Gerard would later create. The ache of absence turned into empathy. The hunger for approval became drive, and his mother's resilience became the armor he carried through every storm. Before Hollywood, before fame, before the roar, there was a boy by the window, waiting, learning that even when love disappears, hope can still grow in the silence it leaves behind. He had waited for love once, and learned it doesn't always come back. But his real test came when the world finally opened its door. From street shadows to the spotlight. The boy who once waited by the window eventually stepped into the world, not as a prince of privilege, but as a man chasing redemption. At 23, Gerard Butler was standing on the edge of failure. After years of studying law at the University of Glasgow, he had finally reached the final step, a week away from becoming a qualified lawyer. But one reckless night at the Edinburgh Festival changed everything. Too much alcohol, too little control. By morning, he was fired. His dream, the one that had carried him out of poverty, vanished overnight. He packed a single suitcase, a few crumpled notes, and a fragile kind of faith, and boarded a train to London. It wasn't a journey toward glory. It was an escape from shame. The rain pressed against the glass like warning fingers. He was alone, broke, and uncertain of what came next. The city didn't care who he was. London devoured men like him every day. Hopeful, hungry, anonymous. He crashed on friends' couches, sometimes floors, sometimes nowhere at all. On nights when he had nowhere to sleep, he'd walk for hours through the city just to stay warm. "I was too proud to admit I had nowhere to go," he later said. "So I pretended I liked walking." Hunger became an old friend, and loneliness an uninvited roommate. He sold toys in the rain, waited tables for strangers who never looked him in the eye, even worked as a telemarketer, dialing numbers into the void. The man who would one day command armies on screen once stood in the drizzle outside a toy store, selling plastic swords to laughing children. When someone mocked his thick Scottish accent, he smiled politely. But later that night, when the streets were empty, he stopped smiling. He saw his reflection in a dark window, tired eyes, hollow cheeks, and whispered to himself, "Who are you?" He was close to giving up. But then fate, disguised as an old friend, appeared. A woman he'd once known from the Scottish Youth Theatre, now a casting director, offered him a temporary job as her assistant. It wasn't glamour, but it was light. Every day, he sat in rooms filled with actors chasing their dreams, and something inside him stirred. Maybe this was where he belonged, not in a courtroom, but on a stage. One afternoon, she took him to an audition for Coriolanus, directed by Steven Berkoff. Gerard wasn't meant to read, but desperation can be louder than permission. He begged for a chance. Berkoff, amused, handed him a page. When Gerard spoke, the room changed. His voice trembled with hunger, heartbreak, and something rawer than talent: truth. Berkoff cast him on the spot. That night, Gerard walked through London's cold streets again, but this time the wind didn't bite as hard. He wasn't lost anymore. He had found purpose. The man who once sold toy swords for coins had just been handed his first real weapon: belief. And with it, he was about to fight his way into the light. He had nothing left to lose, and that's when destiny finally noticed him. But success, as he would soon learn, doesn't save you, it tests you. The price of becoming a king. Success didn't arrive in a blaze of glory for Gerard Butler. It came like a storm, fierce and unforgiving. After years of hunger and rejection, he finally began to rise. Small parts turned into speaking roles, and speaking roles turned into leads. By the early 2000s, The boy from Paisley, who had once slept on couches, was walking red carpets. But with every step forward, something inside him whispered, "Don't forget what it cost to get here." His early roles built a foundation, but 2004, The Phantom of the Opera carved his name into Hollywood's heart. He wasn't a trained singer, yet he spent endless nights practicing until his throat bled, terrified he'd fail. "I didn't want to let anyone down," he said later. The performance earned him praise and pain in equal measure. A quiet reminder that art, for him, always demanded sacrifice. Then came 300, the role that would immortalize him. King Leonidas, the warrior who led 300 Spartans into cinematic legend. The film's success was explosive, earning nearly $500 million and turning Butler into a global icon. His roar, "This is Sparta," echoed across the world. But behind the sound of victory was the silence of exhaustion. The physical transformation was brutal. Months of relentless training, hundreds of reps a day, strict diets, grueling combat choreography. "It wasn't acting anymore," he said. "It was survival." He tore tendons, crushed nerves, and developed a condition called foot drop, where his leg would drag behind him like a dead weight. He limped off set, swallowed painkillers, then went back to shoot again. Out of 50 men in his training camp, only 17 finished. He was one of them, but the cost followed him long after the credits rolled. Every success afterward felt heavier. 300 had made him immortal on screen, but mortal in body. The fame that came with it was dazzling and dangerous. Studios chased him. Tabloids stalked him. The world saw a warrior. He saw a man trying to hold himself together. "People saw the roar," he once said, "but they didn't hear the silence that came after." The silence grew louder in 2011 when, while filming Chasing Mavericks, a 20-foot wave pulled him under. His board shattered. His lungs filled. He thought it was over. "I remember the darkness closing in," he said, "then light and breath." He survived, but the pain never left. The painkillers that once helped him recover soon threatened to consume him. Instead of hiding, he checked himself into rehab. It wasn't about reputation. It was about staying alive. When he emerged, something in him had changed. The fire was still there, but it burned slower, steadier. He had faced death in the ocean and demons in silence, and both had taught him the same lesson. Being a king on screen means nothing if you can't rule your own heart. He had conquered Hollywood, but now Gerard Butler had to learn how to conquer himself. And in doing so, he discovered that true strength isn't found in armor or applause. It's in the quiet courage to start again, even when the world stops watching. He had faced pain before, but not like this, because when the spotlight dimmed, the real wounds began to show. When love becomes the lesson. Gerard Butler has fought countless battles on screen, but the hardest ones were never against monsters or armies. They were against the quiet heartbreaks that no camera ever captured. For all the chaos, near-death experiences, and the roar of fame, it was love that truly tested him. Because some wounds don't break the body, they break the heart. His first real love story began far from Hollywood lights, in the dim casting rooms of London. It was the mid-1990s. Gerard had just been fired from the law firm that once promised him a future. He was lost, broke, and searching for purpose when fate reintroduced him to a woman from his youth, a casting director he'd known from the Scottish Youth Theatre. She saw in him what he couldn't yet see himself: potential. She offered him a job as her assistant, and slowly, something deeper grew between them. They were two dreamers trying to survive the same city. She gave him his first glimpse into the world of acting, his first belief that maybe he was born for something greater. Together, they shared cheap takeout, quiet laughter, and the fragile hope that love could exist even in struggle. But when his career began to rise, their paths began to drift. She had opened the door to his destiny, but he had to walk through it alone. Years later, he would say softly, "Someone once believed in me before anyone else did." I'll never forget that fame arrived, but it came with loneliness. The world saw the king from 300, but behind the cameras was a man still searching for connection. In 2009, that connection appeared in the form of Romanian model and actress Madalina Ghenea. Together, they were magnetic. Beauty and fire, laughter and intensity. They traveled through Europe, walked red carpets, and became tabloid darlings. Yet, the louder the world admired them, the quieter their love became. Between filming schedules, fashion shows, and endless flights, there was no space left to breathe. "She made me laugh," Gerard admitted later. "But the world around us was too loud." When they parted, there were no dramatic headlines, just silence. The kind that follows something real that didn't survive the noise. Then there was Jennifer Aniston, the co-star who reminded him that chemistry doesn't need a script. When they filmed The Bounty Hunter in 2010, their bond was undeniable. Two hearts that had been bruised by fame found comfort in each other's company. "She made me laugh again," he said quietly. But love under a spotlight rarely lasts. Every look became a headline, every dinner a rumor. What had once felt genuine became suffocated by attention. "We were two public souls who couldn't find a private world," he later admitted. And then came Morgan Brown, the calm after every storm. She wasn't fame, she was peace. With her, he found stillness, laughter, and a quiet home in Malibu. But even love that feels like home can fade when life refuses to slow down. After years of breaking and rebuilding, Gerard learned that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go. Because for him, love was never the ending. It was always the lesson. And now, when he speaks of love, there's no bitterness, only gratitude. Every woman, every heartbreak, every fleeting connection became part of the man he is today. He's learned that love doesn't have to last forever to change you. Sometimes, it just needs to arrive long enough to remind you who you are and what you still have to give. For Gerard Butler, love stopped being a chase. It became a quiet understanding that the truest kind isn't found on a movie set or in a headline. It's found in forgiveness, friendship, and the peace that comes after finally forgiving yourself. He had conquered Hollywood's mountains, but when love slipped away, he learned that even warriors can break in silence. Rising from Fire and Farewell. By the time Gerard Butler turned 55, he had faced storms that would have broken lesser men. And somehow, he kept rising. He had survived addiction, near-death accidents, heartbreak, and pain that carved his body into scars. But nothing, not fame, not fire, not loss, prepared him for the silence that came in February 2025. The day he lost the woman who had given him everything, his mother, Margaret. For all the films he had made, all the lines he had spoken, this moment required none. The world's cameras turned away as Gerard returned to Paisley, Scotland, walking the same rain-soaked streets, where his mother once carried him as a boy. The small stone church was quiet, the air thick with memory. There were no red carpets, no fans, no sound, only the echo of the woman who had shaped him into the man he became. "She gave us everything," he once said, "even when she had nothing." Margaret Butler had been his anchor, a secretary who worked 2 jobs to feed her children, the one who taught him strength through kindness. Every success he ever achieved had her name woven into it. When she passed, something in him shifted again. He didn't make public statements. He didn't post tributes. He simply withdrew, to walk by the same river she used to take him to as a child, to remember her in peace. Months later, at the end of How to Train Your Dragon's live-action remake, a single line appeared on screen. For Margaret Butler, whose strength lives on in her son. When he saw it, Gerard wept, quietly. The kind of tears that don't fall for sadness, but for love that refuses to fade. But even before that final goodbye, life had tested him with another kind of loss, the kind that turns everything you own to ash. In November 2018, the Woolsey Fire tore through Los Angeles, devouring everything in its path. Gerard's Malibu home was among the ruins. He returned to find nothing but twisted steel and gray dust, the remnants of memories, letters, and mementos from his mother and early career. He stood there, surrounded by smoke, and whispered 7 simple words. "Welcome to my home in Malibu. Not anger, not despair, just acceptance." "It's not about losing a house," he said later. "It's about realizing what you can't rebuild. The moments that lived there." Yet he didn't walk away. For weeks, he stayed to help others who had lost everything, cooking for displaced families, donating to relief efforts, comforting strangers in the ashes. The king of Sparta had become a quiet servant again. Today, Gerard lives differently. His rebuilt home is smaller, calmer. There's a photo of his mother on the mantel and her final words framed beside it. "Kindness is your real strength." He lost homes. He lost people. He lost nearly everything. But from every farewell, he rose again. Not harder, but gentler. Because the fire didn't destroy him. It revealed the man he was always meant to be. And now, when the world sees him, in interviews, at charity events, or simply walking alone along the Scottish coast, there's something different in his eyes. Not the fierce glare of the warrior who once shouted across battlefields, but a steady calm. The kind that comes from knowing what truly matters, from loving and losing, and still standing tall. Gerard Butler no longer chases the fire. He carries its light, quietly, deliberately, in memory of the woman who taught him how to rise. What would you do if life took everything but left you standing? Gerard Butler's story isn't about tragedy. It's about transformation. If his journey reminded you of your own strength, give this video a like. Leave a comment for Gerard, for the survivors, for anyone still fighting to rise again. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, grace, and second chances. Because as Gerard Butler reminds us, heroes aren't born in glory. They're forged in pain.